Canadian perspective now from Kamal Al-Solaylee. He's an award-winning author and journalist who has frequently written about Yemen, his home country. We spoke in Toronto. Yemen is described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. It's also called a forgotten war. Why do you think it's forgotten?
I think it's forgotten because people don't even know where it is sometimes, or people don't have any set of associations with it. See, when you talk about people from Syria, most people know where Syria is on the map. It's on the Mediterranean. It's pretty close to Europe. But Yemen is a place, for one thing, that has been isolated from the world until the 1960s. Very few people would actually know much about the people there, what's their background, what's their history, what's the country's sort of political system. So it's not on people's mind for them to forget. You know what I mean? It hasn't been on their mind for them to forget it. But I would also think the war has been forgotten because our media has not done a good job of covering it.
At the same time, there are more than a dozen countries that have their hand in that conflict. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously important in some fashion.
Well, I think when the war started in 2015, everybody understood it as a kind of a rift between the Houthi rebels, who are of a Shiite sect, and the government, which is predominantly Sunni, and it was understood in a kind of a regional civil war. But as the years went by, I think I would say in the last couple of years, it became very clear that the United Arab Emirates in particular has some designs on Yemen because of its strategic position at the southern tip of the Red Sea. It's a gateway into sort of the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and therefore Europe, and it's also a gateway further south into the Indian Ocean and the sort of the Southeast Asia in general. So it has gained. It's become about the United Arab Emirates in particular, sort of gaining access to certain ports and certain gateways to the world. So I actually kind of begin to understand it. I started to understand it in slightly different terms in the last maybe 18 months or so.
Yeah, you suggested we need to think about it differently, in a different geopolitical sense. So
That's
how
right.
do we need to think about it differently in that way?
Well, I think you're referring to something I wrote, and the impetus for what I wrote was that we need to stop thinking of it purely in humanitarian terms, because all the reactions to Yemen has been on the level of a humanitarian crisis. So about 2/3 of the population are food insecure. 1 million people die from cholera. All the issues around hunger, which are very important, but also hunger is a political issue. These are not they're not hungry because they're of environmental reasons. They're hungry because the port of Hodeidah, which is the port through which 70% of Yemen's food comes through, is being under siege and is being bombed. In fact, just today I just read that, or this week I read that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi are sort of relaunching their attacks on Hodeidah. So that's why I think we need to think about it in geopolitical terms, because it's about the political will of Saudi, and it's about the political will of United Arab Emirates and the allies that keep them going, particularly the UK and the US and France, and to some extent Canada.
I mean, the United Nations, when it talked about the humanitarian crisis, tried to make headlines out of the story in Yemen, but it's really the murder of Khashoggi that's raised the profile of this conflict in many ways. Do you think it'll actually make a difference?
Well, I think the Khashoggi murder is already moving off the headlines. And the news, you're a journalist, you understand the nature of news cycles. They come and go, and I think the conversation this week is about what happened in Pittsburgh, and next week will be about something else, about the midterm elections in the US. So I worry about pegging Yemen's hope for recognition on this one case, as tragic as it is. And also, like many people have said, and it's not an original thought, is that, you know, tens of thousands of people in Yemen have died, and millions are starving. Why is it that the death of a well-connected journalist is the thing that's suddenly going to make everyone aware of what's going on in Yemen? I find that argument somehow, either overstates the value of journalists on one level or underplays the tragedy in Yemen.
Mm. There is increasing pressure on Canada to either suspend or stop the sale of those light armored vehicles. You've suggested in some of your writing that basically Canada, and these are my words now, talks out of both sides of its mouth.
No, I said something to that effect.
It was similar, I think. You were more eloquent. What do you think Canada should do?
I know what the right thing to do is, and it is to suspend sales to Saudi Arabia until a further time in history where it can prove that it's not going to be used A, against its own citizens, B, in the war in Yemen. But I know the right thing to do is not always the easiest thing to do. I know the political implications of a number of ridings in southwestern Ontario where thousands of jobs are on the line here. So I understand it as, you know, from a strategic and political point of view, but really, what price our humanity, what price are we going to pay for doing the right thing? And I think that's something that only the Prime Minister and the current government, it's something that they have to really think about. And I mean, I like to think that they will set an example, but let's just say I'm not holding my breath, because there have been a lot of sort of misdirection and making excuses like the contract is hard to get out of, billions of dollars, non-disclosures, stuff that keeps coming up that wasn't in the news or wasn't what the government response used to be a few years ago. And if the previous government is the one who made the deal, is the current government who actually signed the permit for Stéphane Dion, who was in charge at the time, is the one who signed a permit to okay the sale
and export.
The export sale.
Yeah. Canada's just one player. I mentioned a moment ago, I think by one count there's something like 18 countries that are helping to supply weapons in this situation. More broadly, what has to happen from an international perspective in your view?
From an international perspective, well, I just think an immediate ceasefire, United Nations, for one thing, a ceasefire, the lifting of the siege on the port of Hodeidah, so that food can flow into the country, and these are my priorities for the moment, like to stop the bombing and the bloodshed, and to let the food in. And then I, despite everything I've said, I still believe in diplomacy. I still believe in getting people to the same room, table, and
wasn't there just this summer talk of peace talks?
Peace talks, yes. They don't always take, but I still think that the Houthi rebels have a point of view that they need to be, that needs to be taken into consideration. And the idea that you're just going to suppress their uprising completely, it's just history has shown that these things don't go away. If you have an ethnic reason to rebel, or a religious, that it may go underground, but it will resurface in a generation or two. So for Yemen's sake, let's just try to find a solution where they maybe get some administrative independence, or some sort of control over certain areas of Yemen administratively, and then just try to get the country back on track, because we're talking about a country where most public employees have not been paid for almost 2 years. We're talking about a country where inflation has been extraordinary. I was talking to my family recently, and they said, like, a tub of yogurt, which is essential to life, into food, and a lot of Yemeni foods are made with using yogurt, has gone up from what used to be 10 riyals to 100 riyals. So imagine if you buy a tub of yogurt here used to pay $1, and now you're paying $10 for it, and that's not. And you need more than one tub to sort of to feed your family.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, the hunger, the desperation that I sort of hear of are things that sort of not only heartbreaking, but also they make the country less safe and less secure for people living there.
I was going to say, what can you tell me about your own family situation?
Well, the thing I could say is that we're a middle-class family, so we manage, like all middle-class people around the world tend to do. We support each other financially because, like many middle-class families, most of my siblings are employed by the government, and they have not been paid for 2 years or more now. And like families that have relatives living abroad, they rely on the money transfer that we send. All families that have children or parents abroad, that is the main source of income at the moment. Their resilience is remarkable. Their spirit is really. I mean, I always complain, if the internet is down or the subway is late, and they have such a strong belief in that things will get better, and that they just have to get through this, and that's the only way they can live, is like to convince yourself is that things will improve, and resilience because they manage on very little.
Things seem so dire now, though, with, as you say, basically the food supply cut off, an increase in the number of attacks and the bombardments. What really is your best hope now?
My best hope? I used to harbor a hope that Canada, through its peace and civilization operation program, would actually be a vocal or a very powerful partner in stabilizing the country. That hope has been fading more and more with each passing day, to be perfectly honest. So I am hoping that if the midterm in the U.S. and the Democrats take over, that there will be much more of a pressure on the U.S. Congress to slow to slow down some of its support for Saudi, and just to try to talk to Mohammed bin Salman, the young prince. I'm hoping that this is all kind of the exuberance of youth, of some in a very violent, horrible sort of way, but that he will calm down. And if there's one thing about the Jamal Khashoggi case, is that maybe he and his close sort of circle will realize that you do not democratize by violence and force.
Thank you
My
very
pleasure,
much.
Alison. Thank you.